The truth is, when you're unwilling to accept and face the fact that you have trust issues, you will find yourself having setback after setback. When all you really have to do is let God be God so that you can be you. Hey, Beacon, welcome home to your Bounce Back Blueprint Community Podcast. I am your Bounce Back Guide, Tiffany Huff Struthers, and I am excited to be your guide as you thrive on the journey from setback to impact and income. Today, we are kicking off our first series, and I can't wait to dig in. But before we do, I want to thank you all so very much for all of the reviews you've been leaving. They have blessed me, and I am sure they have blessed others, because even with the Cornerstone episodes, the downloads are increasing. So please keep them coming. In the coming episodes, I will be sharing some of those reviews with you, shouting you out. And so if you've not left your review yet, please do so after you finish this episode. Also, if you have yet to listen to the Cornerstone episodes, then I encourage you to hit the pause button on this episode now and go back and dig into that goodness before you start this series, because it's going to lay the foundation for all that is to come. And last but certainly not least, be sure you are subscribed wherever you are listening. The more subscribes, the more downloads, the more people will be made aware about this gem of a podcast and be able to thrive and grow through with you. So, all that said, let's go ahead and dig in. Our first series is all about trust issues. Now, you might be thinking, I don't have trust issues. And I hear you, sis, but I'm going to implore, challenge, and encourage you to stick around and listen anyway, because you might be able to share this with Sister So-and-so. So I learned at Godspeed a few years ago that I indeed had trust issues. One of the things I would do towards the end of every year or the beginning of New Year would be to go onto my Facebook and ask my friends, what is the greatest lesson you learned in the past year, right? And 2016, at the start of 2016, I did the very same thing. And the other thing that was very customary for me to do was to share with my email list, when I was sending out love letters at the start of every year, the greatest lessons I learned. So 2016, just to give you a little bit of background, was the year that my father passed away. And what I learned during the year of 2016, without a shadow of a doubt, was to trust God. And you may be thinking, well, Tiffany, if you are, a believer, if you are a woman of faith, then that should be a no-brainer. Well, you know what? I agree, but unfortunately, that is not the case for all of us. And because we are never confronted, or we are rarely confronted with the truth that trusting God is a challenge for many times, we are often living and leading our lives through consistently just quote unquote praying, right? And when all you are doing is praying with no trust, then those prayers are called prayers of procrastination. Basically, you are praying prayers that are causing you to procrastinate, not take action, not do the things, not move forward, right? On this journey of life, on this journey of building your bounce back blueprint, the reality is that you have to be willing to progress, right? You might start out crawling, but at some point you're expected to get up and walk. And then after you walk, you're expected in some cases to run. And in other cases, you are expected to leap, right? Sometimes the only method of transportation you have is a leap of faith. But if you aren't willing to trust God, and if you aren't willing to come to terms with the truth that your real issue is trusting God, then you are going to experience a lot of false starts. You're going to have setback after setback, and you're going to become frustrated in your faith. And I learned this at Godspeed in 2016. My father passed away in January of 2016, and what I learned quite quickly is that though I always had a relationship with God, I believed in God, I was hearing from God, a lot of my faith and trust was displaced because my father had been the vessel for my connection with God, right? He introduced me to God. He nurtured my relationship. He encouraged me in the word. He taught me a lot. And so when he passed away, it was like, whoa, what do I do now? And at that point, I had to go from simply believing in God, right? And believing what I knew to be true based on my experiences and what I'd learned from my dad to depending on and trusting God. And so I know that in the midst of your bounce back journey, you have to be willing to face yourself and address this truth if you have trust issues. Now, listen, Beacon, this is a judgment free zone. And I encourage you, as we move through this series, to have your journal close to you so that you can take notes and know that your journal is a sacred space. It is also a judgment free zone. No one knows what is written there but you and God. And so I want to take some time today to really dig into the foundation of trust issues. And by that, I mean, I'm going to share with you the 4 phases of trust issues that I learned and grew through at Godspeed in 2016. And then in the coming weeks, we will dive deep into each of the 4 phases specifically. So if you're taking notes, you might want to write these subheadings. Phase 1 is I can't trust God. Phase 2 is I should trust God. Phase 3 is I will trust God. And phase 4 is I must trust God. So I'm going to start out by asking you again, do you have trust issues? And, you might even want to pause the episode now and write that question in your journal or, your notepad if you're taking notes on your phone and really get honest with yourself. Do you have trust issues? Do you feel like you live your life believing or depending on God? And ultimately, these 4 phases are going to give you the journey of moving from belief, even unbelief, in fact, to believing and then to trusting. So let's go ahead and dig in. Phase 1, I can't. This is the phase where God spends so much time laughing at us. We tell ourselves we can't surrender, we can't let go, we can't live without, we can't imagine, we can't trust God, right? So you can fill in the blank there. What have you been praying in the past, even and said, God, please, I'll do anything, but don't make me go, don't make me live without, right? That is a clear indication that you can't trust God. Meanwhile, God is laughing at us, in love, of course, because he is in awe of how we think we can make it happen and maneuver this life on our own. Phase 1 is full of stress. It's full of habitual failures and setbacks. It's full of, for many people, binge eating, maybe even binge drinking. Again, this is a judgment-free zone. It's full of toxic relationships. It's full of overspending, overdrafting your spiritual, mental account. And this first phase, I'm not proud to admit, is where I spent a large part of my life. And here are some other things that you can consider or that you can you can use to measure whether or not you're in phase one. In phase one, you spend a lot of time struggling with true lies. What are true lies? True lies are lies that you've adopted as your truth or as truths simply because of how long you've believed them and the work and the grief that it will take to release those true lies, or you believe those true lies because of the source, right? Because your mama said so, because your grandmama said it is, because your daddy said it is, period. Until something happens that causes you to question those true lies. And oftentimes it happens on this journey to learning to trust God. So that's one indicator that you're in phase one. Another indicator that you're in phase one is that you have a faulty focus, right? You're constantly distracted. You can't really focus on or stay committed to anything that you pray for, right? Like you negotiate with God. God, if you do this, I promise I'll XYZ, or I promise I won't XYZ. And so you focus on what you need God to do in the moment and not necessarily what's going on in the moment, right? You focus on what everyone else is doing and then base your prayers on those things. So, a faulty focus and true lies are indications that you are in phase one. Now, let's go to phase two. But before we do, I'm going to ask again, do you have trust issues? Phase two is I should trust God. This is when you are shown you should. In this phase, we experience a lot of deja vu. You know, the on again, off again diet, the on again, off again relationship. We dibble and dabble in church going, reading our Bibles. We might make a few church friends, maybe slide in at a small group or Bible study here or there. Don't trip. Again, this is a judgment-free zone, and I'm really sharing my experience. So if it doesn't apply, let it fly. This is my experience, and a few hundred people I know, but maybe not you. This in phase two, this is also where we begin to see we can't do it all on our own. Let me repeat that. In phase two, this is where we also begin to see we can't do it all on our own. We can't depend on any one person for every single thing. Okay? Catch that. You can't depend on any one person or even any three people for every single thing. And in phase two, we're reminded of that one time when God came through. Like he came through in the clutch. We start praying and getting some answers. And then we start getting a little bit direction. We start getting divine downloads. And this is when God starts getting in our business. This is when God slides in our DM and is like, don't respond. Or, he pulls up and says, try this way. Don't go that way. He tells you, you know what? Maybe you shouldn't call so-and-so. You need to go here alone. Let him or her go. We hear him and we recognize the validity of what he is telling us. And we even admit we should, but nah, we don't. And if you're questioning whether you're in phase two, here are some key indicators. You are drowning in doubt. Even when you feel like you know that you know that you know, you second guess and you're like, I should, but nah, because what if, right? And another indication is that you are burdened by unbelief. Like you struggle with and you chastise yourself with not believing and not moving forward because of the doubt. Like the unbelief is so heavy a burden some days that you struggle to get out of bed. You struggle to have conversations. You struggle to take action on everyday minimal things, right? And again, it's because even though you admit you should, it's a no, because what if God is wrong? Or even more, what if God is right? So again, that's phase two. And before we move into phase three, I'm going to ask you again, do you have trust issues? All right, phase three, I will. Phase three is when you start to look at the calendar and plan to start trusting God more. And again, God laughs. Only this time, he might be laughing with you. Monday I'll start honoring my body and working out. After I buy that new car, that new house, or XYZ, you fill in the blank, then I'll start being a better steward with my money. I'll start tithing. When I get a little older, a little more mature, I'll join a church. I'll get up and pray first. When I get to this point, not right now, but when I'm ready, I'll forgive so and so. So you literally start to plan out and plot on the calendar when things will happen. It's during this time when your desire to trust God starts to shift, and fear is what holds you back more than anything else. God in this phase is constantly reminding you of how he's held you down and built you up. Because the reality is, the whole started from the bottom, now we're here, is really about trusting God. Ask Drake, he'll tell you. So this is the phase where you start to feel conviction, right? You start to feel conviction about the things you need to be trusting God for, but you won't. And the good news is that you can be encouraged because conviction inspires correction, right? And that if you're feeling convicted, it means that you are feeling like God is nudging you more. God is giving you more divine downloads. He's making his presence known more in your mind, in your spirit, right? And you're being convicted. The other thing that becomes more and more pronounced in phase 3 is that God prepared you for a purpose, right? So you really start to feel the nudge of the thing or the people that God has called you to, right? And so you finally begin to recognize and admit, and you're on the cusp of accepting that you deserve more than you've been desiring. And the reason why you're beginning to recognize that you deserve more than you've been desiring is because that conviction is inspiring you, and because you are recognizing that you were purposely prepared for something specific. And so the reality is in phase 3 that you come to terms with is that you've got to trust God to bring the thing, right? To align with the divine, you've got to trust God to manifest and bring things to fruition. Hope you're still with me before we move into phase 4. Again, do you have trust issues, sis? All right, phase 4. I must. This is when never would have made it is on full blast all day, every day in your mind. Or even if it's not that, it's whatever song you listen to when you do the ugly cry. And you know what I'm talking about. In phase 4, you begin to realize you've gone as far as you can go on your own. And I have to be honest and interject this here. For a very long time, my dad would tell me, baby girl, you've gone as far as you can go on your own. And I would be like, well, but I just got a new job or I just got promoted. And because I was in phase 1 and I had that faulty focus, I could only see the worldly perspective of the things that I was doing. And even though I was getting new jobs and getting promotions, I was still not even tapping the surface of what God had for me, what God had purposely prepared me for. And so I was constantly getting frustrated and finding that I was starting to climb a ladder, getting to the top, seeing that it was the wrong ladder and having to start at the bottom of another ladder again. And it was because I had gone as far as I could go on my own. The only thing I could do on my own was climb a ladder to a certain point, bump my head, realize I needed to climb down. But because I wasn't trusting God, I would just go and find another ladder to climb up. And so it took me a very long time, in fact, until after my father passed away, to recognize that I had gone as far as I could go on my own. And so even in phase 4, there are challenges, right? And so if you're there, I want you to be encouraged, because it is in this phase that you recognize you've been running from yourself. Not only have you been running from yourself, you've been running from God. You've been running from the call and the mission of your life. And if you're honest, you're tired. You're tired of being in habitual continual setbacks. You're tired of feeling like every time you rebuild, it's on a faulty foundation. You're tired of the stress. You're tired of trying to maintain the illusion of being in control. And you're tired of that facade. You know, the facade where you're empty on the inside, but full of life on the outside. That facade. Yeah, you're just plain tired. This is the phase of surrender. This is the phase when you begin to see that pruning is not punishment, right? You start to believe and recognize that God has been pruning you for perfection according to his purpose and plan for your life. This is where you get into the truth of the process, that you get some truth and then you have to trust God because there are going to be some tests. Let me give that to you again. You get some truth, right? You get some revelation, and you recognize that with revelation comes responsibility. And because revelation comes with responsibility, you have to trust God that you are responsible enough to carry out what you've gotten through that revelation. And of course, we know that we are going to be tested, right? If Jesus was tested, what makes you think that you are not going to be tested? So it's in phase 4 that you start to recognize that process of truth, trust, and tests. And you surrender to it. You surrender to choosing the call over the crowd. You surrender to making peace before you make the profit. You surrender to finally believing that God is not going to play you. And you accept that you've been playing yourself. You've been playing yourself because you refuse to trust him. You've refused to do the work and be courageous enough to recognize, face, and share your truth so that you can build your bounce back blueprint. So, one more again, sis. Do you have trust issues? Do you struggle with the truth that you must trust God because you feel like you can't? Do you struggle with saying that you will trust God because you know that you should, and yet you keep pushing back the start date? And are you simply comfortable in phase 1 where you can't trust God because of the true lies that you've been told? And if you're honest, you're not really sure that when you do, God is going to come through. Listen, like I said, this is a judgment-free zone, right? And I've been there. I know what it's like. And so that's why we are starting here with digging into these 4 phases of trust issues, because I had to learn on my own that God is not going to play me, but I had been playing myself because I was unwilling to trust him. And what I know for sure is that trust issues are list toppers for keeping you stuck in your setback, and from trust issues are list toppers of keeping you stuck in your setback and for preventing you from really being able to make the impact and income God has called you to, because you don't trust him to use your truth. You don't trust him to use your story, yes, your mess, to bless. And I refuse to allow you to go through 2020 or the rest of your life struggling with your bounce back blueprint because of trust issues. You feel me? And so we are going to dig deep into trust issues. And if you recognize and are ready to admit that you do have trust issues, then I encourage you to have a heart-to-heart conversation with yourself, and then have a heart-to-heart conversation with God. And then after you have the heart-to-heart with God, have it with yourself again, because you have got to do the heart work. And while you're having the conversation, and as you're working through this, and as you prepare for what is to come next week when we dig into phase 1, here are some questions that you can journal through. If you have a friend or some friends that are on this journey with you, you guys can listen to this podcast episode together. And these are questions you could even discuss, create your own small group. You could obviously do it via Zoom at this point in this season. And so here are the questions. Number 1, do you have trust issues, right? Do you struggle with trust issues? Number 2, which phase or phases do you find yourself struggling in the most? Is it phase 1, I can't, phase 2, I should, phase 3, I will, or phase 4, I must? Like I said, for me, I struggle more and longer in phase 1, I can't. And then probably second for me was phase 3, I will. But, answer this question honestly for yourself. Next question. How are your trust issues affecting your life and relationships negatively? Right? How are your trust issues keeping you in those toxic relationships? How are your trust issues preventing you from speaking and living your truth? And I want you to consider when you think about your life and relationships, think about your relationship with yourself before you consider anyone else. And again, that's why those Cornerstone episodes are so important, because Cornerstone number 1 digs really deep into that. So again, if you haven't listened, go back and listen. Next question. What do you think is the worst that could happen if you decided to trust God? What do you think is the worst that could happen if you decided to trust God? And the final question is, who can support you and hold you accountable with growing forward to phase 4? And if you are sitting there thinking, I don't have anyone who I can trust enough with my truth to support me and hold me accountable with growing through these 4 phases so that I can thrive on this journey of setback to impact and income, that is okay, because I have exactly what you need. The Bounce Back Blueprint community is exactly the space where you can be in covenant connection with like-minded women, like-minded beacons of light and hope who are building their bounce back blueprints and want to be challenged and encouraged along this journey. And the time to join the community is now, because starting next week, following the podcast episode on Wednesday, we will begin to dig deeper into these 4 phases within the community and really working through and supporting each other through answering these questions and having discussions. And so I want to really encourage you to join the Bounce Back Blueprint community. You can grab the link right in the show notes and meet us there so that you can answer yes and begin to list names for who can support you and hold you accountable with growing forward to phase 4. And that is your introduction to trust issues. I am praying that you are blessed and that even in the midst of listening to this, you got some divine downloads. Now your call to action is this. 1, excuse me, make sure you are subscribed to the podcast so that when next week's deep dive into phase 1 and all of the other phases come through, you are the first to be notified. After you subscribe, if this podcast episode blessed you, please leave a review, share it on your social, tag me on social media, let someone else know that you were blessed, because they may be blessed as well. And it doesn't cost you anything to share this episode or write a review. Last but certainly not least, click that link, join the Bounce Back Blueprint community, and meet us there so that you can have the support that you need. And of course, until next time, remember, God is not going to play you. But if you refuse to admit and work through your trust issues, you are playing yourself. Be blessed.